Good Shabbos, everyone. As Americans, as Jewish Americans, we often wonder, what does it mean to be free? What is freedom? The 20th century philosopher and historian Isaiah Berlin used to define freedom in two ways. He would say there's negative freedom and there's positive freedom. Negative freedom is when you're running from something. You're just running away. You're running from something, but you're not sure what you're running to. That's positive freedom. Positive freedom means you're running to something more noble, something greater, something better. You know what your direction is. You know what your purpose is. You're running to something better and more noble. That's positive freedom. The Rockets over the last two games, they've been running from the Warriors and not really running to anything. Let's hope that changes tomorrow night. I think of our ancestors when they left Egypt. They had positive freedom, but they quickly forgot, and they were experiencing negative freedom. And how do we know? The first challenge they faced, the first curveball, the food doesn't taste as good as they like. The water is bitter. And after all the great miracles that God performed for them, the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, they complain. They can't handle it. They buckle under the pressure. They're doing negative freedom. They're just running from the Egyptians, and they quickly forget that they're running to something greater. They forget that when Moses went to Pharaoh, he didn't say, just let my people go. He said, let my people go so they may serve God. They forget that they're leaving Egypt to go to Mount Sinai. It's Mitzrayim to Sinai. It's Egyptian slavery to something greater, to Sinai, to the Torah, to the commandments, just 49 days later. The Israelites forget that God took us out of Egypt, not just to take us away from slavery, but to take us to his commandments, to his laws, to his plan, to be his people, to make the world a greater place. That's why we count every night, as we'll do in a few minutes, the Omer from Passover to Shavuot. We connect the 49 days from leaving Egypt to arriving at Mount Sinai, where we receive God's commandments in the Torah. We connect the holidays. We're running to something. We're going to something, not just from something. Judaism was designed to be positive freedom. I think about Shabbat. Often people will complain to me, Rabbi, Shabbat sounds like a good idea, but I just can't do it. There's so many restrictions, so many laws, so many things I can't do. They're looking at it from a negative freedom standpoint. I remind them to look at it from a positive freedom standpoint. You're allowed to take a break. You're allowed to spend time with those you love. You're allowed to come to shul and to pray to God. You're allowed to spend time with yourself. You're allowed to put away the cell phone and not worry about work. Shabbat and so many of our holidays and mitzvot are designed to be positive freedom. I think about the great Natan Sharansky. Some of our younger congregants may not know who he was. Today, he lives in Israel, very famous personality in the Jewish world. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, he was a Soviet refusnik, arrested, sent to the Soviet Gulag, the worst of prisons in Siberia, just because as a Jew, he wanted to leave the Soviet Union and live as a Jew in the land of Israel. But once he applied to leave Russia to go to Israel, he was immediately arrested and spent 9 years in the Soviet Gulag, the worst of prisons, often in solitary confinement. But after he was finally released and allowed to go to Israel, he wrote in a great book, one of his best books called Fear No Evil. And he wrote about that he still had emotional freedom. Even though he was in jail, the more Jewish he became, the more Zionist he was, the more free he was in his mind, because he knew he was running to something. He was trying to seek something greater. He had positive freedom in his mind, and therefore he still felt free. And he knew, even though he was a prisoner, he had it better than the prison guards. He would often joke with the prison guards and share jokes with them. For example, one joke he often shared with the prison guards, he would say to the Soviet Union guards, he would say to them, after the Americans went to the moon, your great leader of the Soviet Union, Brezhnev, announced that the Soviets would do something better, and they would send a man to the sun. But the Soviet Union, the Russian engineers objected. If you send a man to the sun, he'll burn up. What do you think, I am stupid? Brezhnev would respond to his engineers. We'll send him at night. The jokes were funny. But the guards weren't allowed to laugh. And then Sharansky would say to the guards, you see, you can't even laugh when you want to laugh. And you say that I'm in prison and you're free. Sharansky had positive freedom. He knew what he was running to. And thank God he eventually got out and became an inspiration for Jews and people everywhere. When it comes to positive freedom, I think about what happened this past week. I think about Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. I think about the editorial cartoon that was actually published in the International New York Times that depicted Jews in the worst way. And of course, I think about the terrible shooting at the Chabad synagogue outside of San Diego. How can we as Jews respond? What is the best response? Tonight, I would say to you that the best response is not to have negative freedom. Let us not worry about running from those who will always hate us. Let us continue to concentrate on having positive freedom, to run to something greater. I love what the Chabad rabbi said this week. He said our response, the best response from his synagogue and for him as a Jew, was to put more light into the world, to get rid of the darkness that that shooter represented. By doing more mitzvot, by being a better person, by being kinder, more gentle, more compassionate, more righteous, to being the best people we can. That was the best way to defeat the evil represented by that shooter. I think he's right. Because unfortunately, we as Jews will always have those who dislike us, who hate us, even some who will want to murder us just because we're Jews. And yes, we need to fight them, we need to protect ourselves, but the number one thing I believe we need to do is not let them define us. Our goals as a community, our goal as a synagogue can't be defined by those who hate us. It has to be defined by us, by God, by our tradition, by a tradition that says to you and to me that as Jews, we have positive freedom. We're seeking something greater in this world. We'll continue to work to get to Sinai. We'll continue to work to bring more light into this world. Our Torah portion this week, Acharei Mot, after death, let there be life, Chaim. After another death this week, a tragic death of an innocent woman, a beautiful woman, murdered simply because she was a Jew in synagogue. Let us respond the best way she would want us to respond, with life. As it tells us in our Torah portion this week, and God says to our people, here are my commandments, so you shall v'chai b'chem, you shall live by them. Let us never forget that we have a beautiful tradition, not defined by those who hate us, but defined by us when we live by it and we bring more light into this world. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.